left is Amish Tripathi, India's highest-selling author, whose book, The Immortals of Meluha, will be filmed in Hollywood. So congratulations for that. To my left is Dr. Zeenat Shaukat Ali, an Islamic scholar and chairperson of the Wisdom Foundation, and also a professor of Islamic studies at St. Xavier's College. And to my left is Sabira Merchant, the renowned theatre personality with filial connections. Before Sabira reads from the book, Amish and Zeenat might care to make brief opening remarks on the issues the book raises. After that, Sabira takes over the reading. Comes our debate, followed by questions from all of you to all of us. Over now to Amish for a few brief remarks.
I've been a fan of Minaz's writings for a long time actually, so when he called me, I obviously couldn't say no. And I finished this book in just a few days. I really love the book. And what it is essentially a series of articles within a broad range of topics. And rather than speak of the entire book to you, because I would request that you guys buy the book, I thought I'll just deep dive into two issues which he spoke of, which had some resonance with me, which connected to me. One was he wrote two articles on British colonialism. One was on the British apology or the apparent apology to Africa, and of course on Winston Churchill. I think it's important that intellectuals raise these issues. There are two approaches to painful parts of history. We can either indulge in negationism, just say that, oh, it never happened, these bad things never happened, which I think is not a wise course, because it usually suppresses the past, which leads to the pain coming out in unhealthy ways. There is the other extreme, where one looks at the past and keeps seeking vengeance, which is also extremely unhealthy. You see that a lot in China. If you've traveled to China, you find so many Chinese speaking about their 100 years of humiliation. And there's a lot of anger within them, and they want to, and that kind of explains the attitude of that country in terms of their territorial expansionism, and there is a problem that perhaps China and the world will face. And both these approaches are unhealthy. I think perhaps the healthiest approach is to see the truth of what happened. Yes, there were crimes committed, terrible crimes committed. I find it surprising that I can understand a British guy seeing Winston Churchill as a hero. For them, he was a hero. I find it very surprising that there are some Indians who see Winston Churchill as a hero. And for us, he was a monster. He was no less than Hitler.
Couldn't agree more.
You mentioned that book, Churchill's Secret War. You have to read that book to see the crimes that were committed. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. To see the crimes that were committed on India. As in the early 40s, Winston Churchill personally drove a scorched earth policy to stop the Japanese invasion of India, which led to a man-made famine which killed 2 million of our fellow Indians in Bengal. At the same time as Hitler was killing millions of Jews in Germany. All of us Indians know what happened to the Jews. We don't know what happened to our own fellow Indians in the early 40s by Winston Churchill. In my mind, he's as much of a monster as Hitler.
Absolutely.
But there's so many Indians who don't speak of this. Now, what I like about the way it's approached is, we must see Winston Churchill for a monster, but respect the right of a British guy to see him as a hero, because for them he was a hero. So you see the truth of the past and then move on. Right? Don't try and suppress it, and don't try and seek vengeance either. See the truth of what happened and move on. And the first part of that, you speak of it truthfully, and I'm delighted that you've done this. The second thing is a series of articles that he wrote on science. It's an area of passion for me. Much of my reading habits, I admit, would be called very boring by many people. I tend to read a lot of non-fiction books, and I especially like pure science articles. So I actually read the Scientific American, for example, regularly. And Binaz speaks of the challenges that science is throwing up for us. And once again, I'm surprised that intellectuals haven't spoken of this. Because if you see the kind of, and you've spoken a bit of, there's this lovely quote that essentially science is giving us humans the power of God in many respects. So the kind of research that's going on is not in the realm of science fiction anymore. Many of us will probably live till the age of 200. It's not in the realm of science fiction anymore. It's a matter of 10-15 years before that medicine develops. There is research going on in California where they're developing, the end model is to develop a kind of a hat or a headgear which will allow us to read the mind of the person standing in front of us. 200 years ago, if you told someone that you would have a device through which you could communicate real time with anyone in the world, they think you're a god. So all of us have science is giving us the power of God, but philosophically, are we capable of becoming God? Or will we be like a kid who's been handed an AK-47?
Yeah, there's one piece which talks about that,
Yeah.
you know, now outer space and the meeting with ETI and the kind of philosophical, scientific and religious issues that would raise.
Exactly. And when you say that humanity is at this cusp where we can either rise to become angels or fall to become beasts, that's the line that I wanted to quote. And I'm glad you've raised this issue, and this is something which we all need to discuss. Science is giving us tremendous powers. Philosophically, are we ready to handle those powers? And I think India is in the lucky position where perhaps we can help the world in this. Many of the philosophies that we practice here could probably help the world and help human beings figure out how to handle these awesome powers that we'll be blessed by. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. I want to end with, buy the book, it's a damn good book.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amish. Zeenat would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Minaz, for inviting me here, and many congratulations for this book.
Thank you.
When he asked me to speak about it, I agreed, even without looking at the book, because the title of the book was very, very fascinating and extremely challenging to me, A Second Clash of Civilizations. I have myself brought out a book about 6 months ago, which is called The Clash of Civilization, based on the theory of Samuel Huntington, which we have opposed. And being into Islamic studies and looking at the world and conflict, that is what really interested me in this book, is how does one halt the conflict through dialogue? What is our position in India today, where we are facing so many odds between communities? How do we get the communities together to live in harmony and peaceful coexistence? And what is this entire scenario? You know, what really fascinated me when I did this book, The Clash of Civilization, and then looking at Minaz's, 4 civilizations that he mentioned, the West, China, India and Islam, and I thought, why is he saying Islam? Why doesn't he mention the countries? And then you realize that Islam is spread, outside. Yeah, it is today it's called transnational, so, and covering, Europe and the Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia, and varieties of other countries. So I think that is the part of the book that challenged me, that I think that I would like to talk about at some stage. And congratulations, Minaz, and certainly please do buy the book.
Thank you. May I ask Sabira to read a few passages, please?
To be perfectly frank with you, I have not read the book cover to cover, but I skimmed through the pages and I picked out the pieces that I thought were interesting to me, and therefore would be interesting to you, I hope. It's in 2 segments, so I'm going to finish the first segment and then perhaps we could invite some questions and answers. And then I'm going to go on to a second, more personal segment, because we don't know something about Minaz the man, his family, etc. So I thought that would be interesting too. So this is on page 17 of the book, India, the Remaking of History. The 3 men who created the architecture of modern India had widely differing personalities and were bound by one principle, the idea of a strong, united nation. Mahatma Gandhi, in 1947, a year before his death, was at 78, greatly weakened by the numerous fasts he'd undertaken in the freedom struggle and the extended periods he'd spent in jail. Jawaharlal Nehru, a relatively sprightly 57 at independence, was a complex man, liberal, democratic by instinct, scholarly, charismatic, and yet given to the occasional burst of aristocratic petulance. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was Nehru's antithesis, a no-nonsense administrator of farmer-peasant stock. Gandhi shrewdly understood that Nehru and Patel's contrasting personalities were good for free India, that they would all nurture. Without Patel, the accession of more than 500 princely states to the Indian Union would have been a much harder, even fraught task. Without Nehru, the international acceptance India rapidly gained after independence too would have been much more difficult to achieve. Patel knew his limitations. Putting India first, he deferred to Nehru. Many have thought that had Patel been India's first Prime Minister, India's strategic missteps over Jammu and Kashmir would not have taken place. Despite the differences, Nehru and Patel were integral to the concept of a free, liberal and inclusive India. Along with Gandhi, they played a pivotal role in the remaking of Indian history. Modern India's evolution can be broken up into 4 broad phases. The first phase was the brush with Britain. Many of the outcomes of this encounter impoverished India and enriched Britain. But there were collateral benefits. The English language, which gave Indians a window to global knowledge, science, technology, and modern government. The unification of old kingdoms, regions, and provinces, which had disintegrated after the fall of the Mughal Empire. The rule of law, and a civil service. The second phase was the freedom movement. India's English-educated elite led the fight for quality, justice, and self-government. But it was the average Indian in whose name the Mahatma won freedom. The third phase, after partition, was executing the nation's tryst with destiny. Language, caste, and religion had to be reconciled. The economy, denuded by nearly 200 years of colonial occupation, had to be rebuilt, and democracy had to be nurtured. We are now in the 4th phase of our evolution as a nation. Democracy is firmly established. In the next 47 years, according to a study released by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, in 2013, India will be the largest economy by purchasing power parity, which Minas calls PPP. So in 2060, just over 100 years after independence, India will have progressed from a de-industrialized colony into the world's premier economic superpower. But within the next 47 years lie several pitfalls. The first is misgovernance. In subsequent pages in this book, I have dealt with the malaise and the medicine. How a new architecture of governance can transform our democratic institutions. Today, many of these institutions are hostage to malign governance. They must instead be citizens' guarantors of good governance. India's economic progress has been driven by entrepreneurial energy, not by the government's often regressive policy. A nation is as good as the foundation on which it is built. Our founding fathers laid the plinth. Today's leaders must put up the steel girders. Only then will poverty, malnutrition, corruption, and misgovernance be mitigated. And only then will India's tryst, destiny, as promised by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1947, be fulfilled. That is the first part of my reading. Any questions that people might care to ask?
My question is, I don't need to be skeptical, but my question is that, don't you think that you're too idealistic? One, it's based that you talk about very strong foundation, you talk about the inspiration that our leaders have bestowed on us, okay? But I feel that somewhere along the way, it's very lost. It's like a building with a very strong foundation but very weak materials which is collapsing. I need to build it again and again and again and again. And I feel that somewhere along the way, you're becoming very idealistic. There is no practical application of it. You're talking about something which is, you can see it in your mind, you want to do for it, but for that you really need to be in the gutter to really build it. The building part is a process, it goes on and on and on. So to conclude it by saying that it's a tryst of destiny, I think it's a bit far-fetched.
If you read the later chapters after what Sabira Merchant has read, you'll find, in fact, because this is the sort of writing I've always done, you'll find very specific solutions to all the problems of misgovernance, of malign government, of economic reforms being stalled, of contemporary problems that we see today on the Lokpal bill. There are chapters in which solutions, specific solutions, are actually put put forward. And there's one particular chapter which you may not have read, which is called The New Grid of Governance, in which I talk about 5 different kinds of institutions that should be the bedrock of good governance, from which only can ultimately economic power of the kind that this particular passage talks about actually occur. So I take your point completely. It's very valid that there's no point in being idealistic, but that's the starting point, and you do need to look at the mid-step, which I think the book does take, and you do have to look at the outcome suggested in the book, which again, if you read it carefully, you might find it.
And he does mention the malaise and the medicine, which I read, so
and the medicine
it will solve itself out.
Yeah, the medicine does come later in the book, quite
that's
detailed.
exactly, yeah.
The topic is the clash of civilizations. My request, rather than a question, would be to read out paragraphs that bring out a contest, clash, or conflict of civilizations, so that we get a flavor of the book. I'm speaking for the many persons who haven't read. This thing exactly is not the flavor of the book. And point taken. Something could be read out which indicates or showcases contest, clash, or conflict from your book.
So you feel that there should be more collaboration?
No, I'm saying read up a part of it from the book, which has a flavor of the book, of the contest of it, rather than just this. This is not the true flavor I felt.
You want a passage to be read which gives the flavor of that particular
contest, clash, or conflict of civilization.
Well, it's spread throughout the book, so it's very hard to hone on to single passages. I just chose passages that are meaningful.
I think the gentleman has a valid point, and if I may use a bit of telepathy, I did mark out a passage precisely on that, and give it to Zavira for her consideration.
Yes. Well, let me just read this out to you. Each of the 4 civilizations that will shape this century has threads going back millennia. Ancient Greece and Rome were the precursors of the US-led West, Chinese and Indian civilizations dating back to 3500 BC. Islam is the youngest of the 4 civilizational strains, but geographically it too has predecessors in antiquity: Mesopotamia, today's Iraq, Persia, and Egypt. While Christian Europe clashed repeatedly with Islam from the 8th century onwards, the West began its slow ascent in the 13th century. Education was the key to this ascension. Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne, Heidelberg, the great universities of the West were all founded around this time as seats of ecclesiastical learning. They soon evolved into centers of science, arts, and the classics. The scientific and industrial revolution that followed the Renaissance in Europe enabled the West to lay the foundation for its modern nation states. India and China, meanwhile, lay dormant, 2 ancient and weary civilizations in decay. Each was reshaped by contact with the expansionary West and by Islam. But their approach to outsiders was markedly different. China's martial dynasties, confident in their Middle Kingdom's self-image of being the center of the world, treated upstart 17th century British and Dutch emissaries with disdain and remained largely free of Western influence, except for coastal Hong Kong. India, fragmented and directionless, was plucked piece by piece, first by Islam and then by the British Empire. Like a sponge, it absorbed these influences and remade them in its own mold. America's history provides many clues to its current behavior. It was founded by working-class families escaping religious persecution from newly Protestant England 425 years ago. These English settlers, Britain as a nation had yet not been formed, massacred indigenous Indians, appropriated their land, and shipped in slave labor from Africa to work the fields. The US won independence in 1776, and as it grew more powerful, it invaded Mexico and by 1848 had annexed what are today California, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. By the 1890s, it had colonized the Philippines and built a silent empire, arching from the Pacific to the Atlantic. After the Second World War, it invaded Korea, Vietnam, and Grenada, and propped up dictators and puppet monarchs in Latin America and the Middle East, including the early Saddam Hussein and the Shah of Iran. It made a pact with the sheikhs of the post-Ottoman Middle East to deny Arab citizens voting rights in return for US military protection, ostensibly against Israel, but in reality against popular democratic movements in their own countries. With such a colorful past, it is hardly surprising that the US continues to follow a foreign policy of ruthless self-interest in Asia to secure its geopolitical goals. But both the US and China have an Achilles heels. The US is a declining power. By 2045, it will not only be relegated to the status of the world's third largest economy after China and India, but will also, for the first time in its history, become a non-white majority country. African Americans, Latinos, and Asians comprise nearly 30% of America's population today. By 2045, that figure will rise to 51%. The implications of this demographic shift will resonate across social, ethnic, economic, and cultural boundaries. As India's own demographic dividend kicks in, New Delhi's bargaining power with a declining US and a communist China sitting on a tinderbox of suppressed people's movements will grow if South Bloc gets its strategy right. This strategy involves deepening India's economic and diplomatic engagement with Africa and Latin America, influencing the course of the post-US Afro-Pak world with its scattered terrorist threats, and using old military ties with Russia to create a secure environment in the Indian Ocean to the south and the Central Asiatic republics to the north.
Since the book is called The New Clash of Civilization, how the contest between America, China, India, and Islam will shape our century, I just want to know, do you think Islam will take over all the other religions in the near 100 years or 200 years? Since it is a wide... I know it's a far-fetched thing to say because we have a lot of religions.
It's the fastest growing, isn't it?
Yeah, Islam, as Sabira said, is the fastest growing religion in the world. And people ask me, why do you include Islam in these four civilizational forces? Because the three are country anchored, China, America, and India. And each has its zone, the Chinese zone, economically and socially and culturally, which extends to the South China Sea, the Confucian culture, and so on. India's economic zone, which is the arc from West Asia right down to Myanmar. And of course, the American economic and cultural zone, which extends to Europe and bits of Latin America. So Islam is the only religion which is pan-national. You have Islam in modern societies like Turkey, in the West, and then you have it completely to the East, again in a relatively modern society, in Indonesia. So Islam is pan-national, and it's the only religion really where countries are defined by the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the Islamic Republic of Saudi Arabia. So it's a huge civilizational force. Christianity, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Confucianism, all of that.
All of them.
Is not pan-national. It's, and people don't define themselves by that particular religion. You don't say I'm Christian first and American second. You're American. Whether you're Christian or whatever, it's completely secondary or tertiary. Which is why I brought Islam to answer specifically whether it'll take over everything. No, this is a contest, and throughout the book, I talk about the collaborative value of the contest, where each...
I think Zeenat would also like to pitch in.
Yeah, Zeenat will just,
Since she's
please
an
take
expert
over
on
on this.
Islam. Yes. Thank you, Sabi. The first thing I'd like to say is that, we have this great conception that Islam is a force, violent, expansionist, and has, the only objective of Islam is to gain territory. And, it's violent. It teaches you, to be ruthless. Please note, the first thing I'd like to say is, I want you to relax on that issue. Islam is nowhere close to violence. Muslims are violent today. We will talk about the geopolitics, I think, that are involved in what, Sabi has just read out to us. And those geopolitics have to be very clearly understood. You know, when Minaz says that yes, this great spread from Europe to Southeast Asia to West Asia, I'm not going into that, you know the entire spread. But first of all, you have to understand that it is important to understand that the followers of Islam are not a collective, homogeneous entity, but are structurally varied and differentiated. There are over 60 Muslim countries where Muslims have a diverse culture, speak different languages, have different customs, wear different form of dress, have different food habits, and owe allegiance to different forms of government. There is, what we tend to think that, there is stratification that all Islam, the world of Islam is, is monolith. It is not monolith. That's the first thing. The second is, it also must be remembered, they are not identical, structured, or homogeneous, as I just mentioned to you. And Islam itself is not static. It is dynamic. Over the years, you find that it has grown. Its jurisprudence, its understanding, its historical, understandings, and even its spirituality has grown and spread far and wide. So if we were to say that there is only one faction that believes in one thing, the third thing that I would like to point out, that you find that in Indonesia, for instance, or in China, or in Morocco, or in Egypt, or in Russia, there is a different line of thinking. You see, people who became Muslims, incorporated, assimilated, synchronized, as they have done so in India. So, I want to speak more of India. There are more questions on that subject. But this is one aspect of it. And the third aspect of it I would like to point out is that even religiously, there are different understanding and reflections coming from extrapolations. For instance, there is somebody who believes in Sufism, there is somebody who believes in Hanafism. They come down to Islam, but there is somebody who believes in Shiaism, there is other people who believe, in different sheikhs. So these are certain aspects which must make you understand that there is no uniform word that one has to fear, because this ingredient of fear that the West has put in. And maybe in the next question answer session, I would like to go into what is actually a clash. What do you mean by a past clash and what do you mean by a forthcoming clash? Thank you.
Yeah, I was sitting quietly, admiring your attempt to analyze the forces of civilization and the results that have ensued in present times. We look at civilizations, as you say, driven by or inspired by forces. So if you say the organized state power has inspired a civilization, you'll say Indian civilization, Chinese civilization, Arab civilization. If you say religions, as you have done in your book, religions have inspired civilization, then you'll say Buddhist civilization, Christian civilization, and so on, Hindu civilization. Then there are other forces. You say industrial civilization, agricultural civilization before that, tribal civilization preceded that, and in present times we say IT civilization. But what permeates the entire human race on the entire planet is this, that every human being on this planet is brainwashed, is completely forced to do what these forces are making him do. So you will have, this is an Islamic man, you know exactly how he will dress, how he will kill others.
Well, the question?
Yeah, that's a question. You know exactly what they're doing. Now you have to tell, with your great insight and the appreciation of what you have written, which I appreciate what you have written.
Thank you.
How you escaped this thought that every one of us is brainwashed, mind conditioned, and we do only what we have been told to do. We may be told to hate scheduled caste, we may be told to hate Hindus or hate Muslims. You have to explain to us now.
May I
Yeah, this is my
reply?
question.
I'd like to point out that in the chapter on the myth and reality of secularism, I've talked about a lot of the mythology around many of the hate-mongering, many of the prejudices, and many of the other issues that you raised. So, there are a series of chapters around from page 35, page 45 onwards, particularly the one called The Myth and Reality of Secularism, explore exactly the kind of, not brainwashing, but definitely the problems that have led to the false definition of, and I'm taking only a specific example, of secularism, because that's a very important point in today's ethos of our country. If you look at it, the kind of political parties, and I don't want to get into politics per se, but since your question is about brainwashing and why I've not dealt with it, actually, I must address that. I have dealt with it in the sense that, there are these 3 or 4 kinds of people who brainwash. And I'm taking secularism and communalism as an example only. Who are these people? First of all, they're communal politicians dressed up as secularists. Whether it's the Samadwadi Party or the Congress or the NCP or the MIM, many of these are secular parties which do not practice secularism. The second are, and we've got to be clear about this, the mullahs in the Muslim community who want to keep their flock under their control, and they can only do that by keeping them backward and impoverished, and they do exactly that, and they've done exactly that for 65 years. The third is, I'm sorry to say, a part of what I am, the media, which has been, in the past 10 or 15 years, been completely compromised and is hewing to the line of some of these brainwashing politicians and mullahs. And the fourth of these 4 influences, and I'm not talking of the 4 civilizational influences, but the 4 brainwashing influences that you mentioned, which I've dealt with in great detail, is the very well-intentioned, and I'm sure there are 80% of them here, very well-intentioned, secular, upper-middle-class Hindu who feels a great deal of empathy for Muslims who they feel have been discriminated against, who have swallowed this brainwashing line that Muslims and other communities have not been given a fair deal, and don't realize that actually what's happened is that secularism has been abused as a term and as a concept. So do look at that chapter, you might find something interesting there.
Well, it so happens that I'm going to be reading from Secularism, chapter 5. I had to take that out of my head because I thought that was interesting reading. And it also goes a little bit into Minaz's family, and I think at this time I should introduce my sister-in-law, Minaz's mother, Fatima, please, to whom this book is dedicated. Please stand up and be recognized. Secularism, chapter 5, Myth and Reality. On a cold spring day over 60 years ago in California, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, a tall, angular man of 22, was in a garrulous mood. He told my father, Pakistan, see what we will do with my wonderful new country. My father, like young Bhutto, a student at the University of California, Berkeley, was unimpressed. A country founded on theocracy, he told Bhutto, will never work. My mother, amongst the first Indian women students on the Berkeley campus, agreed. Bhutto walked away in a huff. Those were heady days after independence. Bhutto went on to become Pakistan's youngest cabinet minister at 30 in 1958. My parents returned to India after 4 years at Berkeley, got married. My father took charge of the family's petrochemical business, which thankfully, he was later liberal enough never to invite me to join. The difference between Pakistan and India today is the story of how a great religion, Islam, has been distorted by those entrusted to protect its liberal ethos. Pakistan and several countries in the Middle East have used Islam not to liberate, but to imprison their people. But it is in secular, inverted commas, India, that the damage has been the most insidious. Jawaharlal Nehru was a secular man. He would have been horrified at what passes off as secularism in modern India. In its purest, most classical sense, secularism requires treating religion as a private matter. It must not enter the public domain. Pray in public, pray in private, but keep your faith at home. Politicians who have little to offer by way of development, 24 electricity, water, housing, sanitation, roads, infrastructures, jobs, etc., will use religion to divert the attention of the common man. It should shame the Congress that the constituency from which Feroz Gandhi, Indira's husband, first entered the Lok Sabha in 1952, Rae-Bareli, and from where succeeding generations of Gandhis, including Indira and Sonia, have been elected, is today one of the most backward constituencies in India. Over 70% of children below the age of 5 in Rae-Bareli, for example, are moderately or severely stunted due to malnutrition. Who is to blame? Obviously, the Congress. It has run India for roughly 81% of its post-independence history. The opposition, especially in the States, must share some responsibility for this as well. But make no mistake, the primary responsibility for the poverty and malnutrition India still suffers, even after 67 years of independence, lies squarely at the doorstep of the Congress. It has misused the term socialism to enshrine poverty rather than eradicate it. The poorer the voter, the easier it is to win his vote without bothering about real development issues. My daughter, that's Tehzeeb who just stood up, a designer, often visits areas in Mumbai to source raw materials for her work and to commission artists. Most of these artisans are Muslim. Most are very poor. Most live in buildings which could collapse any moment. She asked me, why doesn't the Congress NCP government in Maharashtra, which wins elections based on votes from poor Muslims, do anything to improve their lives? The answer, because poor Muslims don't have time to think beyond the next meal, also don't have time to think of governance and development, and how both have been sacrificed at the altar of secularism. So 60 years ago, on that Berkeley campus, my father told Zulfikar Ali Bhutto why Pakistan would fail as a state. Today, my daughter, as she visits Muslim-dominated ghettos for sourcing her raw materials, sees how Muslims in India too have failed. The single biggest cause, communalism. But in quite the opposite way, the Congress, SP, and other secular parties define it. True secularism runs through the bloodstream of India, but that bloodstream has been poisoned by gradual injections of communalism over the past 125 years, first by post-mutiny British rulers and later by unscrupulous Indian politicians. India has assimilated, mostly with good grace, Islamic, Christian, Persian, Confucian cultures. Every conqueror of India from 700 BC to the 18th century has remarked on Hinduism's essentially secular philosophy. The Congress, like the British, has played a double game. It has appeased Muslims in quite the worst ways, by example, for not enforcing a uniform civil code, and at the same time kept them economically and socially backward by not encouraging them to emerge out of their medieval mindset. Take a straw poll of Indian Muslims. Would you prefer to live in India or Pakistan? Nearly 95% would unhesitatingly say India. Pakistan has been socially lacerated by theocracy. India is a more mature country with a deep and long history of religious tolerance and compassion. The strength of India is this secular tradition. While nations struggle with racism and ethnic strife, India has shown that 1,225 million people from dozens of different religions and cultures can live together in relative peace. That is not a small triumph, but it can quickly become a big disaster if we continue to allow politicians to set a communal agenda, however secular its grammar. As we ready ourselves to elect a new government, the message that should go out is this: the time for communal politics and appeasement of minorities is over. Give your vote to the party that will deliver on its promises of a return to the highest traditions of Indian secularism, equality and justice. And here I end my reading. Thank you very much.
You said that Islam is not monolithic, and yes, it sounds very true when you say that. But yet, when some religious place like a mosque is damaged elsewhere, why does the inflammation or the hate or temples get destroyed or churches get destroyed? Why? I don't think in any other religion this kind of I don't know what to call it, this feeling or emotion gets spread out. Why would you say it happens only in Islam?
Thank you for your question. The first thing here I would like to say is that, basically within the heart of Islam, there is respect for all religions. And that is what a Muslim is taught. I can quote you several verses of the Quran, but it will take a lot of time here. But, where the Jews and the Christians and the Sabians and all those who believe in God are, are the chosen people of God, and God loves them all. Now, you see, when you're talking about this, you have to understand that there's a lot of politics involved. And I'm glad you've raised that question, because I think that this aspect of destruction which is coming in is due to various reasons. One is political, the other is, sort of a medieval mindset. The third is, that there's a lot of poverty involved and people use their time or misuse their time. But I think the reason, the political reason for destruction and, standing up against is suppression. Now, when Sami mentioned that, Muslim appeasement, I would like to know, what do you mean by appeasement? The Sachar Committee report, if you've seen that report, has shown that Muslims are unemployed, uneducated, underprivileged, undernourished, no jobs, 1% in the army, 0.5% in the police, and I don't know what. But this has been the findings of a commission by 7 people who are not Muslims. Justice Sachar himself is not a Muslim, and he headed this commission. So this was just a finding. But what has been done about it? So when you leave people to languish, in poverty, showing that you don't care, and you see what Minaz has mentioned and what Sabi read out was this issue of communalism. You see, we have created a nation which is in silence. You have made labels against people. That is a Muslim, like you pointed out, sir. This is the way he's dressed, so he's a terrorist. This is a lady who wears a burqa, so she must be discarded. Where is democracy? I thought in democracy you could dress as you like. I don't wear a burqa. And I don't think, I think differently. But that doesn't mean that I have to condemn somebody else who does. So you see, this entire perception that we are looking at today, which has come about in the last, I would say since 1992 proper, is also due to this clash of civilizational theory that was brought out by Samuel Huntington, and which was a purely political theory. I've studied that extremely closely, and I do not think cultures or civilizations clash. I will present you with my book, which we have brought out, A Dialogue Among Civilizations. Healing Memories, a dialogue amongst it, has gone on to show how the Chinese influenced, the Indians, and how the Christians influenced the Muslims, and how the Jews influenced, and how the Hindus have influenced the Muslims, and the Muslims have influenced the Hindus. It's a very syncretic culture in India. I have a published paper on that, okay? A synthesis between Indo-Islamic culture. But that is not the point. The point is when this perception is raised, and as it was raised after the fall of the Soviet Union, and how did the Soviet Union fall? There were 3 points that were brought out to that fall. The first was that the Soviet Union is expansionist, and so therefore America must contain it. It was a theory of containment which was brought out by this very famous man called George Kennan, published in Foreign Affairs, the early 90s, when the Clash of Civilization theory, and this Clash of Civilizations were published immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union. There was no Soviet Union left because they said expansionist, they said ideology, and then they said security. These were the 3 issues raised to subdue, and once that civilizations collapsed, you found that the Islamic civilization was the next one that was confronting, that was a confrontation, that would not allow a unipolar power to exist. So please understand the politics of it, and I am saying this with total responsibility. After studying this, there are many things I love about America and Americans. They have 350 odd years of democracy. They have a black, an Afro-American president. How they treat him is another point. But is he simply, a face there? But whatever that may be, they have their own good points. They have people who have fought against that culture. They have a very strong democracy. But at the same time, they do not want, they want wealth. You know, when the oil was discovered in West Asia, you find that it was sort of spearheaded on the scene. So therefore you find that these clashes which have come about have actually brought a destruction and a perception. And then the perception was brought that this is a Muslim, he is uneducated, he is violent, he is, what you call Islamophobia. So this is the whole study. Thank you. I'm sorry to take so much of the time.
Yeah. May I ask Amish to have the last word? And your comments on what Zeenat has said, and indeed on the book, the last word is yours for 5 minutes.
Actually, I think this is an important topic to talk on. I'm not a Muslim. And this was the only place where I did have a bit of a debate with Minaz when we spoke on the phone. Regrettably, the public impression of Islam is driven by what happens in the Arab world. Most of the Arab world, most of the countries are frankly pre-modern societies. They still need to, the societies need to modernize a lot. A fact that's forgotten many times is actually the largest Muslim country in the world is actually Indonesia. And one must travel there and see Islam the way it's practiced in Indonesia. You will find that many of the Muslims actually have Sanskritized names. So I've met Muslims with the name Saviti, which is their interpretation of Savitri, for example. The Muslims out there actually believe that Islam came to Indonesia through Arjun, the Mahabharata hero. I told Vinaz that I strongly believe that the way Islam is practiced in India and in South Asia, sadly Pakistan has got confused and it's trying to Arabicize itself. But in India and Bangladesh is radically different from the way it's practiced in the Arab world. And there is, I believe that there is a strong tradition of liberalism and religiosity that runs in India. And this is not just something that is the preserve of a particular religion. Every religion, the way it's practiced in India, is religious and liberal. And we can have a countless number of examples of this. You go to Ajmer Sharif, it's the tomb of a Muslim Sufi saint. Majority of the people who visit there are actually Hindus. There are many Christians who visit there as well. A little known fact, all of us celebrate Ganesh Chaturthi with tremendous vigor, as we should in Mumbai. Little known fact is that a large number of the idol makers of Ganeshji in Mumbai are Muslims. Equally little known fact is that many of those Muslim artisans have a tradition that they do the first puja of the idol before they sell it on to the Hindu customers. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. The Hindus who buy the idols don't think they're doing anything wrong. This is Islam in India. It's unfair to judge it by what happens, by seeing what happens in the Arab world and in Pakistan. And I just want to end with one incident, and it shows to me the, sadly public discourse in India is dominated by two groups. I keep talking about them, two groups of very small minorities, but two groups of secular extremists and religious extremists. They're both idiots and they feed each other. A vast majority of us Indians are religious and liberal, but they dominate public discourse. There's a little known fact that all of you should know. We know that in 26/11, 10 Pakistani terrorists attacked us. They were all killed. Does anyone know where they were buried? You will not know. It's a little known fact. Sadly, it has not been covered by the Indian media. God alone knows why. Perhaps because of their own bias. Even the so-called liberal media has not covered this. I discovered this from an article I read in the New York Times actually. The Muslim Ummah in Mumbai refused to accept those 10 bodies. And in the Quran, it's clearly written that even your enemy has to be given complete proper burial. It's a duty that you have even towards your enemy. The Muslim Ummah in Mumbai refused to accept those 10 bodies. They said what they've done is un-Islamic. They cannot be given the burial of Muslims. How many of us Mumbaikars know this? This is Indian Islam. This is the difference between India and Pakistan. We should celebrate what we are.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank my guests, Leah Merchant, Amish Tripathi and Zeenat Shaukat Ali.